Brenden Kumarasamy is a public speaking coach and founder of Mastertalk. He teaches executives and coaches to become top 1% communicators. He completed over 300 podcast guest appearances, 200 plus on Podmatch. We gave him the #1 guest spot on the platform. Brenden, excited to have you here today to talk to us about being the best podcast guest we can be.
Mark, the pleasure is mine. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, yeah. And this episode is being recorded in the Podcast Savant Mastermind Cohort group. I'll have links to the members that are in this call below. If you'd like to become a member, if you'd like to join the cohort, if you'd like to grow your audience and income, what are you doing? Join the link below. Join up with our weekly calls. It's very affordable. We're going to make it work. We're going to get you to your first six-figure year. So a couple quick announcements before we get into the content today. First of which is we have a special meetup this upcoming week on Monday. Because PodFest is coming up next week, the Thursday session is being moved to Wednesday night. So Wednesday night will not just be a show. It's going to be me, you, group, cohort in a room chatting together. The main focus is going to be on Q&A. So my challenge to everyone on Monday is come to the group with a problem. What's a problem that has you stumped? Are you not clear? Is something getting in your way? Do you need to get connected to someone? Come with your problem. And my goal is that everyone leaves with at least 2 to 3 action steps to solve that problem. Come to the group with a problem. You're going to leave with solutions to that problem. All right. And then if you have not yet, put it in your calendar next month. We've got Pat Flynn joining the show. He's going to be guest leading, answering your must ask questions. So what are you doing? Put it in. We're bringing in Pat Flynn to the group, baby. So put it in your calendar now. Boom. All right. So now we've got announcements out of the way. Who's ready to talk podcast guesting? Let me answer this. Who's already on the schedule to be a guest on a podcast? Maybe you haven't done it yet, but it's in the schedule. Is anyone scheduled to be a guest on a podcast? No one? Brenden, I see.
I don't think I count though. I think you're asking the members.
Yeah, well, I am too. I'm scheduled. I've already completed two podcast guests already this year. And then the one that I was supposed to be on this week got pushed back a week. So yeah, podcast guesting is big. Guys, if you're not being a guest on podcast, it's important. And actually, let me shift over to Brenden here. Brenden, you were on 300 podcasts last year as a guest. Why? Why is it so important for us to be guests on podcasts?
For sure, Mark. So everyone has different reasons for being a guest on a show. Right, for some it's business growth, for others it's audience building, and for others it's all of the above. The specific reason why I guest on podcasts, because I'll be honest, most of the shows I'm on do not ROI. Like I'm not some billionaire because I've been on 300 podcasts in this year anyways. The reason I do it is because one, I just really enjoy it. I just think it's really fun meeting new people and answering questions. It keeps me sharp. That's the main reason I do it. That's why I have the energy for it, or else there's no way I could do 300. The second reason I do podcasts is because I'm preparing myself for the future version of who I want to be. So there's an advice I share on a lot of podcasts, which is think about who you want to be 10 years from now. So let's say I'm 26 currently. So think about the 36-year-old version of yourself. Or if you're 45 currently, think about the 55-year-old version of yourself. And ask yourself, what is that person doing? How is that person acting? And what advice would they share with you for the person you are today? And that 36-year-old version of me, Mark, is guesting on Joe Rogan, is on Lewis Howes's podcast, is on Tom Billy's, on all the big shows. So for me, being on everybody's podcast now is preparing me for those big moments. And I had my first big one a few months ago when I guested on the biggest podcast of my life. But the reason I bring that up is because those 300 podcasts prepare me for that moment. So I see podcast guesting as a training ground, even if there's other benefits too, like clients and of course sharpening your skills as a thought leader. And then the third reason why I love guesting on podcasts is really because it helps me articulate my ideas better to clients. So for example, if somebody asks me a question on the show, it then gives me content ideas for my YouTube channel or to answer better questions for the work that I deliver for my personal people.
I like that idea of like sharpening your sword, getting in the practice reps. Did anyone else? I know just the other week, has anyone ever been been a guest on a podcast and you kind of felt awkward? You were kind of bouncing all over the place. Do you?
I was going to say, yeah, I have. And it was when the podcast host was like, by the way, we're going live on LinkedIn and some other social networks for the interview. And it was like right before it was going to go live. And so I like immediately like seized up and was super awkward as I was communicating.
Brenden, when you go into a session, and I'm going to kind of bounce around. And by the way, anyone, if you have a question, please raise your hand. I want to give you a chance to ask and engage. But Brenden, before you go into a session, do you already have like a game plan? Do you have like 10 stories that you want to make sure that you share? Like, how are you prepared going in?
For sure. So let's start from the grounds up, Mark, which is this. I believe that the best way to add value in a unique way as a podcast guest is by following what Christo says about value. So let's start with what is that definition. So the definition of value is tell me something I don't already know. So what you want to do as a thought leader is, why do people have you on your show? They have you on the show because they want you to share insights that help their audience. But the additional layer I'll add on top of that is, how do you add insights and value in a way that no other guest in your industry can do that? So now how do you do that? There's a couple of pieces to that. The first piece is you want to invest the time to listen to other people in your niche who guest on podcasts. So when I started Mastertalk, when I was like 22 years old a few years ago, I didn't even know I could guest on podcasts, but I'd listened to hundreds of episodes of other people talking about communication knowledge. And then I would say, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't work. And I disagreed with a lot of the ideas that they were sharing. So I started creating my own. So that's the first piece. For you to say something unique on a podcast, you need to first understand, what is everybody else saying? So that's how you figure out, okay, out of my 100 insights, 90 of them are being said by 80% of the guests, but these 10 ideas are never shared by anybody on any podcast. So that's how you prioritize the information on the show. And that's what ultimately leads to virality. What does that mean? What do I mean by virality, Mark? What I mean is, when you share those 10 insights, like when I was on Entrepreneurs on Fire 2 months ago, I shared insights that no other guest on that show had shared, because I listened to like 80% of all the other communication professionals that were on the show. So you can see all the prep work that goes into the performance that I give when I'm on a show, especially for the bigger ones. So then when you share unique value, then what happens is a bunch of other podcasters reach out to you and they go like, whoa, like you shared a lot of cool ideas, like the random word exercise and the question drill and all that fun stuff that I've never heard before. Do you want to be on my show? And that's how you bring that value and you scale it to the masses.
So I think this is a really important concept. It's something I've been thinking about. I just recorded an episode for this week on that. It's look at your competition. If I'm hearing, look at your competition. What is the mainstream belief in your niche? And then how can you find something outside that narrative? Am I hearing you correctly?
You got it. Or another way of saying it, which is exactly what you're saying, is look at the insights that everyone is sharing and just ask yourself, if I was on that show, is there something that I would share differently? So I'll give you a concrete example. When I was 20, I started listening to Lewis Howes's podcast, The School of Greatness, when podcasting was kind of just starting a little bit. And I would listen to these communication professionals long before I had the idea for what I was doing today. And I'd listen to them and go, like if I was on that show, I would actually say these three things, because I feel what that professional is sharing on the show isn't really concrete enough. And I would just write it down on a notepad. But eventually the notepad got so big that I just said, oh, why don't I just make my own videos and just share this information for the world? That's actually how Mastertalk started in the first place. So if you're a health professional, if you're a procrastination expert, it doesn't really matter what you do. Just listen to how somebody is sharing ideas. And there's two ways to stand out. One is to create new knowledge that doesn't exist yet, or to package existing knowledge in a way that hasn't been packaged before. So you can also look at how somebody else shares information and go, okay, I would have shared the same idea, but the way that they got to that point was too complicated. It didn't make any sense. Like, I'll give you a comparable in my industry. A lot of people in my niche are PhDs in communication. So they went to a Stanford, they went to like a Harvard, they went to like a bigger university. And they spent a decade watching and listening to communication knowledge and sharing it. But whenever you listen to them talk, you go, this is too theoretical. Like somebody who's like a single mother with 7 kids who doesn't have time to read dissertation defenses can't do anything with this information. So I took all of it and I simplified it for the mass audience, and that became my unique advantage.
So a couple things there. I think at the end of the day, Brenden, what you're talking about is standing out, right? Because in a sea of podcasts, you definitely want to stand out. The idea of taking an idea that is not mainstream, creating new knowledge or reformatting existing knowledge, and making it more simple. This is one of the reasons I keep preaching frameworks. I was talking about this with Phil, with Robert, I talk about this with everybody. What are the commonly held beliefs in your industry, and how can you create a framework to make it simple? How can you make it simple? I would open up the floor too here before we keep moving through here, because this is really good. Does anyone have kind of a thought, or when you think about your industry, is there like a mainstream, well thought out idea that everyone agrees on, but you maybe disagree or have a different angle on it? Feel free to unmute and share if you do.
Well, I wouldn't say that there's like a main thought or something that's like consistent in regard to like a belief, but I found within the industry that I am niching to, there's a lot of excuses as to why they aren't able to like achieve the results that they want. And I've actually tried to tell them directly, is like, well, you're not really taking ownership of the real problem, which is you. I mean, you're casting that power out and you're giving the excuse to everything else. And so I'm finding that it's a real challenge knowing what to say to get them to be like, huh, you know what? I should just look internally rather than just blame everything else. So that's kind of where I'm at in trying to figure out, how do I word my messaging or word my approach so that I can help them get past themselves, really. You get them out of their own way.
And I think that's, again, why having frameworks are important. So I struggle with this because most business owners, most entrepreneurs don't want to be told like you're screwing up, you're doing things wrong, right? Because we're putting so much time or effort. So what I try to do personally, and Brenden, you might speak to this, is try to develop stories that help maybe the other person put themselves in my shoes. Robert, for example, is working on an offer for landscapers and contractors to basically make their life much more simple by becoming better leaders and hiring better teams. The problem or the challenge here is most business owners don't want to be told you need to learn how to be a better leader. No business owner wants to hear that. But if you can successfully tell a story that helps that other business owner put themselves in your shoes, you're kind of helping them to take the action rather than telling them you need to take the action. You know what I mean?
100%. Like, I think a way to simplify this, Mark, for the team, because there's a lot of different strategies you can take to be a really good podcast guest. And of course, the other part, which I'm sure you'll ask me about, is how do you get on shows? But I think the first piece, everybody, is, and this is kind of like an easy action item that you want to do if you want to be a world-class podcast guest in your niche. So the first piece is literally just listen to a past for those of you who have been on at least one podcast, just one. Okay, you don't have to have been on hundreds, just one. Re-listen to the whole episode and write down every question you got asked in that interview and just replay it in your mind. If I were to re-answer this one question, how would I answer it differently? So the reason my answers are a lot sharper than they used to be is not because I'm special, guys. It's I just put more work in than anybody in my industry. Because my 10-year-old version, the person who's 36, wants to be on all those big shows. So that's just not me going, oh, I have these dreams. No, it's like, how do I mirror the actions that I take on a daily basis so that those dreams come to life? And this simple idea of re-listening to your tapes, right? Kobe Bryant used to talk about that all the time, the NBA. Every game that he won and he lost, he would watch all the tapes, which is wild. Even I don't watch the tapes that I do well in. I only watch the ones that I'm really bad at. But if you're not even taking the time, team, to re-listen to one of your episodes, you're playing this game wrong. Like, you're not even at step 2. Forget about step 10. So step 2 is going, okay, let's and literally write down the questions. And this is an exercise that I teach called question drills. Every day, just answer one of those questions. Put your time and focus. If I were to give the perfect answer to this question next time, how would I answer it better? So this will automatically put you ahead of 85%, 90% of anybody in your niche, because most people, fortunately, because podcasting is still in its infancy, which is, I know, odd to say, but it's still in its infancy, nobody's really trying. Everyone is just pitching random ideas and products. So if you're just taking the time to re-listen to your episodes and just ask yourself, how can I make this better? You're going to be really you're going to be really good. I take this to the extreme, which is I do that and I go on podcasts that have nothing to do with my business. Like I've been on menopause podcasts, I've been on sports podcasts, marijuana podcasts, nothing to do with anything. And I don't even smoke. I've never been drunk once in my life. It's like the opposite of what I believe. But I literally go on the show just to see what new thing can this podcast host teach me that I didn't already know. So when he's going into this industry and giving me this context, I once was on a show where the woman was breastfeeding while interviewing me. I can't even make this up. It was wild. But you know what I learned from her? I learned from her because she was having such a tough day. She has she has 6 kids running around. Her youngest is 6 months old and her oldest is 7. So you can imagine the chaos in her day. And she's still doing this interview. She still has a show. I was like, oh my God. So every single because I love people, right? That's why I love doing these things, is I'm learning something from every podcast that host that interviews me. And I use all of that knowledge as a weapon to make myself better as a guest. But that's the extreme version of it. You don't have to do that. But I think step 1 is really just re-listen to your tapes.
I think that's a really important thing that I do too, because if I'm listening to a tape and I'm listening to a story, because if I find that my story is boring or it's disconnected or it's confusing, I want to look back at that story. I want to look back at that example and try to clean it up. Because what I think inevitably happens is you're going to be a guest on shows is you want to have like a bank log of 10, 15, 20 different like monologues that you go into. Gary Vee does this, by the way. Gary Vee didn't just wake up and he was just an expert storyteller. He's refined stories over years and years and years. And so that's, I think, a really important thing, Brenden, is how can I refine my stories to actually make sense, to actually be more interesting, to lead my audience in the direction that they want to go. Because as a guest, I think you want to try to get into those spaces. Brian, you have a thought here too?
Yeah, I got a question for Brenden. So when you're going back and you're looking at your tapes, like what are the thought patterns like going through your mind? Like what questions are you asking yourself, and what are you looking for as you're going back and reviewing?
Excellent question, Brian. I love that. So there's a couple of things I'm looking for. One is definitely just the simple exercise. Repetition is the key, right, team? Or else we don't implement. Literally writing out the questions physically on a piece of paper, on a notepad. So let's say a common question I'll get asked is, I'll tell you a funny story. Where does the fear of communication come from? So the first time I got that question, dude, I had no idea like what the answer was. I was like, what do you mean, where does the fear of communication come from? I didn't invent this. Like, I don't know. So I would say something like San Francisco, Los Angeles. I'd make a joke about it and just move on. So that's a great example. I would sit down with that question, Brian. And the second step to your question is I would criticize myself. This is such a crap answer. Everyone in my industry doesn't have a good one. Can I do this better? So I'd criticize myself. I'm very critical about how my own performances. So when I guest on bigger shows, I've re-listened to that tape like 5 times, 6 times, 10 times to make sure I can do better. Depends on the length of the episode, obviously. And then the third part to that is I'll take one of those questions, Brian. I'll sit down for an hour or like 30 minutes and I'll rewrite it and I'll redo it. And I'll tell you why I have that stamina to do this, because a lot of you probably think I'm crazy, where you're like, oh my God, like this is nuts. Like, dude, I'm just trying to build a landscaping leadership business. Like, so the way that I teach my advanced clients on this, but I'll kind of give you guys the frame. I believe there's 2 funnels in any business owner's life, right? If you really want to change the world in a meaningful way. The first funnel is the one that gets you clients, and the second funnel is the one that changes the course of human history. So the frame that I always set, Alex Hormozi has a very similar set of beliefs in that way. That's why he's found so much success in his personal brand. is 100 years later when I'm dead, will people still remember my own ideas? That's actually the frame I take whenever I'm on a show. That's why I've accelerated my growth really rapidly in the space, because that is my intention. My intention is not to get business, because I already get a lot of business off of word of mouth. I don't care about that. It's really more about saying, like, how do I create the best ideas? But because that is my focus, Brian, the intention that I bring when I'm rewatching my tapes is very different. So let's say I'm going through these questions, I'll literally write down everything I felt was wrong. One other bonus tip as well that I give Brian, because you asked such a great nuanced question, is you can ask people that you trust to rewatch that episode and find criticisms as well. And it could be something as simple as, hey, Brenden, when you shared this, I didn't really understand what you meant. Like, what do you mean by the random word exercise? I couldn't really implement it. So that gives me, like, I'll give you a simple one. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but hope it's helpful. Like case competitions. That's how I learned how to speak. Nobody knows what a bloody case competition is because it's such a small community. So when I started saying case competition, every time people would look at me and go, "What is that? Like, is that like debate?" So now when I tell my story, I go, "Hey, I did case competitions. Think of it like professional sports for nerds. While the guys my age are playing football, I was doing presentations competitively in business school." And they said, "Oh, that's what a case competition is." So even that tiny nuance, because I'm getting that feedback, I'm able to retweak my script. Does that help, Brad?
Oh, for sure. So just a recap. So it sounds like you take a look at how you responded to certain questions, and if it was something that you weren't too thrilled about, or it just didn't really sit with you well, you would sit down, you would analyze it, and you would start to think, like, if I wanted, like, let's say, an answer to this question to remembered 100 years from now, my ideas and the way that I presented myself to remembered, like, how would I say this? And so that would be one of your approaches. But at the same time, it's like if you're constantly getting people that just aren't sure exactly what you're saying, you would take the time to find an easy way to be able to explain it so that it made sense to everybody and everybody was on the same page.
Absolutely. And you just remind me of one other piece, one tip. By the way, nobody, what I'm sharing today, team, nobody implements these tactics. So even if you're, because I invented a lot of these. So even if you're doing like 10% of what I'm saying today, if you do, because I know I'm crazy, you guys think I'm like nuts. It's totally fine, because I am. But even if you do like one or two things from today's show, you're ahead of the what, like landscaping. Nobody's doing it in landscape. I don't know who the person was who's working on that, but like you have no competition. One bonus tip I'll give that I get my clients to do for me, my best ones, is I get them to listen to my podcast because they're my ideal client. So I'll get, let's say, a Lauren or a John to listen to my podcast, and they'll go, "Hey, that was really good, but you taught me in week 7 of your program, Brenden, to do this. Why don't you talk about that and give that away for free?" And I go, "Oh, that's a brilliant idea. I should have thought of that." Like, I literally have a 60-minute call next week with one of my clients to just give me feedback. And he's listened to like 10 of my episodes. So I'm just taking notes for I know I look like I talk a lot, which I do. But that 60 minutes, I'm keeping my mouth shut. I'm just asking him questions and I'm writing it down. And he's going to give me 10 new ideas that I haven't thought of.
I'll tell you what, the feedback and making things clear is very, very important. Anytime I get a question from someone that's something that my website or my social media page should have already answered, I ask myself, why am I getting this question? Is it because I'm not being clear enough? So I think that, assessing that, because sometimes it's just as much as one word in the wrong place can change everything. John, do you have a point to add here, brother?
Oh, you're muted, John, by the way. Yeah.
Sorry. I just got a quick question about clarity. Clarity on what you want to give the audience that will be listening to you. I found with myself in the last 6 months that I no longer want to focus on just depression and how exercise and martial arts helps improve depression. I want to focus more on, how does, the physical body perform better, right? And how that can help depression. So it just feels like the clarity is just being fogged up. How do you just stay focused on your mission or on your what's the word I'm trying to look for? Your topic, I guess. I don't know.
For sure, John. Great question. So there's a couple of schools of thought, and I'm glad you asked it because I'm sure a lot of people listening to either the recording or today feel the same way. So there's two parts of answering that question. The first one is how I found the clarity, and the second piece is the framework behind it. So when I was debating what type of professional I should be, I kind of went into three different categories: life coaching, career coaching, and communication coaching. That's where it kind of fell down into. But I didn't really know which one to focus on because I was okay at all three. So I went through all three, and here's the frame that I did, and I'll give you all an exercise to help you clarify this. It's actually not as hard as you think it is. So the first part is to go, okay, relative to everyone else in the industry, if I'm doing an honest assessment, because I'm a unique human being, like John is a unique human being, Mark is a unique human being, Brian is a unique human being. We've all been through a unique set of experiences. So there's something unique that we have to share because nobody has lived your life, right? By definition, that's the way I think about it. So now it's about figuring out what serves the world the best. So when I looked at my life, John, and I looked at life coaching, communication coaching, career coaching, when I went to life coaching, I was like, I could be good at it. Like I could be good at getting clarity and helping people with it. But do I think, and given my frame, which is I want to be at the top of the field, I don't think it could be Tony Robbins. Like that guy's really good at what he does. I don't want to get to that level. Then when I went into career coaching, I said I could be good at this, but I've never really held a VP SVP role, so I can't really teach somebody how to get that role. But then when it came into communication, I felt that I had a lot of ideas that were worth sharing, that Dale Carnegie wasn't sharing in his books, nobody was sharing in his podcast, and I just felt the delta of talent that I had in that space made more sense, and that's what ended up helping the world the most. So I focused on that. That's the easy frame. Here's the more concrete thing for everyone here. Make a list, and you guys could do this in real time if you want. Make a list of all of the insights or fields that you would be interested to talk about. So let's say I was running this exercise with John. One of them would be talking about depression. One of them would be talking about health. One of them would be talking about the physical body, exercise. And you make a list of everything that you're remotely interested in. And it'll end up being a list of 10 to 20 things. Does that framework make sense so far to you? Right, so make a list of 10 to 20 things. The second part to that framework is a question that I'll repeat twice because it's a little bit wordy, even 3 times if need be. Next to each of those words, I want you to write a number, and the number corresponds to the following question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how energetically excited would I be to talk about this thing for the next 10 years? Let me repeat that again. On a scale of 1 to 10, how energetically excited would I be to talk about this one thing for the next decade? And I'll do it one more time. On a scale of 1 to 10, how energetically excited would I be to present that one topic for the next 10 years? So what this does is, going back to Rob Dyrdek's advice about this, he always says never follow passion, John. He says always follow energy. Whatever's lighting you up, whatever's going like, oh wow, I can do this is fun, that's what you need to be doing. And then the last part to that framework is whatever's 10, 9s, and 8s, just ask yourself deeper questions back to yourself. Why is this a 9 for me? Why is this a 10 for me? Why is this a 5 for me? And what happens is when you do this, it becomes really clear what excites you and what doesn't. And often what excites you the most is what will often allow you to build a deeper niche and expertise than anyone else. Like you can't guest on 300 podcasts, guys, unless you really like people. Like you just can't. Like it's really exhausting. Like you have to really enjoy talking and adding value, or else you just can't do it. So I think finding your niche and being clear on that is the same way. Did that serve you in any way, John? Was that helpful? That framework there?
Yeah, it just seems that I might be shifting the podcast focus from how exercise and all that stuff, all exercise, mental health, and all that stuff is going to be, because it's good, it serves a purpose, but it just feels like it's losing its hold on me, and I'd rather talk about like misunderstanding terms and techniques in the fitness industry and how you can improve yourself and you know Mark knows how unorthodox I am in the gym. Like I asked him to do something on me, and he's like, "No, I'm not doing that. I'm too scared."
But I think, sometimes I'll speak from personal experience of what I'm going through. I think that there's some parts of your business. Listen, you got to put food on the table. We got to make money, right? We're after as entrepreneurs. We're trying to leave our day job. We're trying to get to that first 6-figure year of our offer, 6-figure plus, right? There's going to be some stuff that I have to do that I'm not a 10 on. But I think what Brenden, you're pointing at kind of is identifying, if you're not a 10, why? And how do we how do we talk more about the 10 and less about the 5?
1000%. You absolutely got it, Mark. It's that idea of how do we position ourselves in a way that maximizes joy. Like, for example, John, you're probably thinking with your podcast that was a sunk time. Oh my God, I wasted all this time. Why did I do this? I actually think that's a gift, because what you're doing is you're experimenting. You're realizing, oh, okay, well, this is not the topic. Let me just pick one of the other 9s. And then eventually when you hit it, then you're going to be willing to do that for the next decade. The only reason I found it early isn't because once again, I always like to emphasize, it's not because I'm special or anything, guys. It's because I just did all that inner work earlier. That's all. So I just went through that framework a lot quicker in life. So I found that focus of what I want to do with Master. Now I'm definitely not going to change my mind, but I might in 10 years. But I think it's that ability to just do that inner work, those questions. And then to Mark's point, doing your media strategy in something you really care about, and then finding a different way to pay the bills and making it happen. That's all.
Yeah, we want to spend. It's a lot easier to get up in the morning when you're excited, when you're following the energy. I like that example a lot. Brian, you have a question here too?
Yeah, I wanted to see if Brenden had a follow-up to, after you've written this list and you've gotten your 10s, like a follow-up question to try to narrow it down. And the reason why I'm asking this is because if you were to ask me, I would tell you that 3 things that I love talking about that I can spend the next years talking about. 1 is storytelling, 1 is communication, and 1 is sales. So as I'm thinking about this list, it's like, is there a follow-up question I could potentially ask to really figure out, like, this is truly who I want to present myself to the world, like what I want to be known for?
Absolutely. So for you, Brian, it's really easy because you're in the same niche as me. So it's really two things, not 3, because communication and storytelling is the same kind of group, right? It's presentation skills, and I talk on both. And the other part is sales. So I think the real decision that you need to make is, am I going into the communication route or the sales route? And those are definitely different paths. So here's the best way to figure this out. Communication, study people like me and 10 other thought leaders like me who are much better than me, obviously, like Robert Cialdini, things like that. And just go and just write down the insights. It's actually really easy to do this. Write down the insights that you feel me and everyone else isn't talking about that you have in your mind. So you write those insights down. It's okay if it's just 2, right? It doesn't need to be 200, just 2 or 3. Then do the same thing with sales. Listen to Jordan Belfort, listen to Grant Cardone, listen to all the sales people, right, in your industry, and do the same thing. Write different pieces around sales that you feel nobody else is talking about, and then you compare that list. And then whichever has the biggest list is the one you should be doing for a longer period of time, provided you're energetically excited by it. So, for example, if you got 7 insights for communication and storytelling, I would group that into 1, but only 2 insights for sales, then for sure go the route that I went, but do it your own way, right? And just go the communication route. But if it's the opposite, do the other one. That's why I like comparison. A lot of people think comparison is the thief of joy. I think that's partially correct. I think comparison is a tool that most people use the wrong way. So for example, a lot of people, when they use comparison, they do it badly. They look at the Kardashians, they go, oh my God, they got this house, my life is over, right? They're comparing the wrong things versus comparing the right things, which is going, I really respect Tony Robbins' work. I really love what he's done, but I don't think I can get to his level in this. This is me speaking on behalf of me. But when I look at all the communication professionals that Lewis had in a show, that Mark had in a show besides me, I look at them and I go, you know what? They're not putting my level of work ethic. They don't have the insights I do. I could probably beat them in the industry. So I'm using comparison as a tool to make better decisions for what serves the world in the best way.
Fantastic answer, Brenden. Thank you for sharing, my friend.
Of course, man.
Yeah, the comparison is very important up front too. Depending where you're at on your journey, but if you're just very early, just very much starting your offer, building your offer, I got this wrong. If I would do a Google search for my idea and nobody was doing it, I was like, score, nobody's thought of the idea yet. But now I see it as the opposite. Now I see it as nobody's doing my idea yet. Why not? What's broken about this model? So I think that finding and comparing the right things is very, very important. And then once you've kind of gone through this idea, so I love the way we've kind of formulated this. Once we've gone through our idea, once it's kind of fleshed out what we want to talk about, now we've thought about ways that we can stand out as a guest, taking an idea that's outside the mainstream. Now we need to get actually booked on shows. So, I mean, you got booked on 300 shows. Most people that want to go on shows are paying booking agents tens of thousands of dollars to get that type of result. Did you have a booking agent, and how did you go about booking yourself on that many shows, Brenden?
No booking agent, but I will say I did pay for one of the appearances, which of course, Entrepreneurs on Fire, you got to pay to be on the show. But besides that, I got on every show pretty much for nothing. So how did that work? How did that happen? So let me start with the first piece, which is a mindset I always like to inculcate when I get this question. You should be saying yes to every appearance. And I don't even care if it has nothing to do with your business. The first 100 appearances, you should even keep score. And I am shocked. I know Gary Vee talks about this, but here from my perspective as well, which is similar. I'm shocked at how much people who say no to small shows. I think it's nuts. You know, even when I was on Mark's show, when we had each other on, we kind of helped each other because I was like episode 20 on his show. Like I wasn't looking at him and going, oh, like I just said, oh, he wants to have you on the show. Let's be on the show. And now he has a massive podcast, right? And now the episode here has a much bigger reach than the first time I was on his show. And that's fine, right? So there's always somebody in the world who will have you on their show. It's just a matter of figuring out who that person is. So the first piece is be open-minded. Okay, just say yes to everybody. The second step is the pitch, and the third step is how to actually crush the show, which we talked a lot about, so I won't cover too much. So the first step is the mindset. Okay, everybody can have us on the show. We just got to figure out who it is. The second step is output. Here's an analogy I want to drive, which is very similar to sales. If I pitch one show, the chances of me getting on the show are not very high. But if I pitch 24 shows, the chances of one of them having me on is very high. But what if I told you we pitch 24 shows a day? That's how you get on 300 shows. If you pitch 24 shows a day and you get on only one, let's say the other 23 tell you to F off. They go, you're done, forget it. We don't want to hear about your Mastertalk message, but only one of them says yes. Well, if you pitch 24 shows a day, and I'd even do that close because I guess on 300, not 365, you get on 365 shows. So here's a mindset I want to drive with the team. Don't reject yourself. Let the host reject you. Okay, never reject yourself. There are so many shows in my career, I have no idea how I got on. That, by the way, that have not benefited me in business, but like just that I just think is hilarious. Like, why would they have me on? Like, I remember some guy, he was the CEO. This is all real stories, but I'm sure a lot of you think I'm making this stuff up, but it's like real stuff. I remember the CEO of an animal sanctuary wanted to have me on their show. I think I pitched him randomly. And part of me was thinking, like, why is this guy having me on the show to make fun of me? I don't get it. And I got on the show and I asked him, why did you want to have me on? And he looked at me and he said, you know, Brenden, your videos really helped me because I was trying to raise money for my pigs and my sheep and my cats at my animal sanctuary, and your tips really helped me raise more money. So I wanted to have you on the show. And I was really surprised. I even was on a menopause show once. Makes no sense. Why would they have me on the show? I literally have nothing to do. And I asked her, like, why would you have me on? And I pitched her. That's literally. And she literally looked at me and she said, you know, Brenden, I wanted to say no at first because obviously you're not a woman, but I was watching your videos and I was thinking to myself, a lot of my women are really sensitive. They're really introverted and they don't really have somebody who's teaching them how to speak. So I'd love to have you on so they could have those conversations better with their family, their loved ones about how to deal with menopause in their life. And I was just like, oh, right, that makes sense. So I went on Ad Value. I was on a grief show once. Anyways, the point is, I know this sounds very controversial because a lot of people in my industry disagree with me. I'm a big believer of pitching shows a lot more than you otherwise would. But let's build on what that means. So there's kind of an in-between, right? Between the template message and the fully customized one. I think
hold
JL,
on.
the, oh, jump, yeah.
But before we get into the pitch, I have a question here, Brenden.
Please.
Yeah, which I think is important, because when you start talking about, oh, you just need to pitch 24 shows a day, the first thing that pops in my mind is, how the heck am I going to find 24 shows to even pitch?
Oh,
let alone get an assistant to help. Like, I can go to Podmatch, I can find shows. Guestio, great place to find shows. Are you like going to Listen Notes and paying $2,000 for an email list? How are you finding all these shows to actually pitch to be on?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's why you're such a great interview, right? So the point is Podmatch. Honestly, I'm an affiliate for them. I'm sure Mark is too. A bunch of us are, for good reason. Okay, like, I don't affiliate with products I don't believe in. Like, that's just my reputation. It's really important to me. Podmatch is insane. I'll say this, it's crazy. Like, I've tried all of them. Guestio, I'm not a big fan of. I'm always public about that. I did get on Entrepreneurs on Fire because of Guestio, because Travis has a relationship with John Lee Dumas. That's how we got on the show. That's the only plus I'll give him. But Podmatch is literally a category of one. So how does that work? How did we pitch 24 shows a day? So how the Podmatch system works, and I think Alex is really smart about it, is you can pitch 6 podcasts every 4 hours. So it's kind of like Tinder, but for podcasting. So they just match you up. But the thing is every 4 hours you can pitch 6. So I'm awake 16 hours out of the day, right? So what's 6 times 4? 24. So literally, I would have 4 timers go out in the day. That's how I became the #1 guest on the platform. The second one's pretty close to me, so they're catching up. But the idea is, in the morning, first thing when I do when I wake up, I don't even have an assistant for this, because I just like sending pitches. I don't know. I really should have an assistant. I should take lessons from Mark here, so nobody's perfect. But I think the key is, I literally wake up in the morning, send my pitches, which takes like 5 minutes to do. We're going to talk about what that pitch looks like. Then I have a timer in my calendar that says at 12 o'clock or 12:30, send another 6 pitches. So I do my meetings, which are mostly podcast interviews or sales calls or coaching calls. And then when it's 12:30, I go back on Podmatch and I send another 6 pitches, then 4 hours again, etc., etc. So that's actually the simplest way. I think if you guys want to get on shows, just do that, but outbound. Because the problem is, people will get Podmatch, Mark, but they don't utilize it, right? Like, I was telling Brian this literally last month. I was like, are you pitching 20? I literally sat on a call with them for 45 minutes. Hey, are you pitching 24 shows a day? And he's like, no, Brenden, I'm not. I was like, that's why you're losing. That's why I'm kicking your ass on Podmatch. It's not because I'm more special. It's because I'm just nobody on the platform, Mark, except for me. And this is, by the way, within the terms of conditions of Podmatch. This is nothing illegal. Like, Alex knows. I'm buddies with him. He knows I'm pitching 24 a day. But that's how the platform works. You could do 6 every 4 hours. It's just nobody is doing the output. And anyways, a point that I want to drive on this is a quote that I'd love for all of you listening to write down. If you communicate 20% better than your competition, you will stand out 100% of the time. A lot of people think that it's all about doing the fluff, hiring all these podcast agencies, which I think are a waste of money, by the way. Okay, I think it's a huge waste, versus just going, I'm just going to do a little bit more than Brian, than John, than Mark, than Phil, than everybody else, and I'll just get exponential results. So because of that, I was able to book a show on average a day on Podmatch, and that's how I got the results I did this year.
But and to your point, Brenden, it depends on your buckets, and what I mean by that is, sure, I could spend an hour a day on Podmatch sending out messages, but where is that time coming from? Is it coming from family time? Is that coming from my prospecting time? Because at the end of the day, I'd love to be a guest on shows. Why? Because I want more business. I want a bigger audience for After Hours Entrepreneur. I want more clients in my group. I want more clients in my production company. And one of the best ways to do that is through prospecting. So I think it's important to just kind of put your time in perspective. But if I'm hearing you correctly, in order to get on a ton of shows, you have to do a ton of outreach. One of the best places to do that is simply through Podmatch, which is a free platform to get started on, by the way. Go to Podmatch, start doing some searches and finding shows to be on, right? I'll also put this out there. If you have the same goals and aspiration as Brenden to be a world-class speaker, yes, you should say yes to every single show. I'm still going to say no to some shows. There's just some shows that are just not, I don't want to take time out of my bucket for the community here, for my, so I think it's important to just be clear on where your goals are. So let's say that you've gotten all the goals, you've written out your list, you have ways to stand out, you've developed some stories, you're on Podmatch. tell us about the pitch, because I want to stand out. I want people to say yes to me. I've done the research. I found the shows I want to be on. How do I get the host to say yes?
Right, absolutely, Mark. And I'm glad that you're level setting this, because you know me, I'm pretty extreme in everything that I do. So Mark's absolutely right, right? Your goals will depend and change based on the way. That's why I always like to emphasize whenever somebody listens to me, if you just do 10% of what I say, you'll get the result you're looking for. So today you just asked, what are the 2 to 3 things I agree with Brenden on, and how do I implement them? Let's talk about the pitch now. So let's keep it really simple, and I'm more than happy to send it, by the way, Mark. We can probably do this in a sec. I can just send it to all of you. You can have that as a bonus for attending today's call live. But I think the point is, it's really simple. Let me start the principle. Let me start by saying I don't agree with JLD's approach to pitches, because it's too long and you're spending way too much time researching for a no. I sent JLD a templatey pitch and he said yes. Okay, let me just make it clear. So there's a way to balance this. So I call this the half custom, half templatey message. That's the name that I give it. So essentially, it's still a template message, but it's customized enough where it convinces the host that you took the time to do your research. Let me give you an example. So my pitch literally sounds like this. For those who are listening to the audio version of this and might have access to it, maybe you can post in the show notes or something, Mark. My pitch. It starts with, "Hey X, what is the name of the host?" Okay, people don't do that. I think that's crazy. Okay, so let's say I was pitching Mark. Let's use Mark as an example. But when I pitched him, I sucked, so my template wasn't as good as it is now. But it was like, "Hey Mark, comma." That's it. Okay, my name is X, and I help people achieve this. So the next part is, "My name is Brenden, the founder of Mastertalk, a YouTube channel I started to help people communicate." One sentence, eh? People's pitches are way too long. That's the thing. This is what I do. This is who I am. Then the next one is a personalized message to him. "Great to see what you're doing with X podcast." Insert podcast name here. Doesn't matter what it is. So the after hours entrepreneur. And then I say, "Great focus on X." So X, what I do is I copy paste part of the podcast description into the text. Nobody does this. So from Mark's perspective, it feels really personalized. But from my perspective, it only takes me 10 seconds to copy paste. So I don't lie to the host. I don't say, "Hey, I've listened to this episode." Listening to episodes is a waste of my time. It's like 45 minutes to listen to an episode and then telling them, unless you're pitching, unless you really want to be on the show, then do that. But I think it's a numbers game. So at this point, maybe not Mark because he's a bit savvier, but most hosts are convinced that this pitch is personalized. That's why my hit rate is so high. And a lot of people give me compliments. "Hey, wow, this is so personal." I was like, in my head, I was like, "No, it isn't." And then after that, I just go one sentence again. "I'm reaching out to your show because I want to help your audience solve for this X," which in my case, I ended up going with "present effectively online." It's a topic not a lot of people talk about. And then the last paragraph is sorry, not even paragraph. The last sentence is just, "Hey, let me know if you'd be interested in having me as a podcast host, and I hope you're staying safe and healthy." But the last part to this pitch is actually the most important. A lot of people make the mistake of just sending a podcast interview that they were on. I think this is a mistake. You can do that, but the issue is that Mark is getting a lot of pitches every day. So he's not going to sit there and go, "Oh, Brenden, somebody I don't know is sending me a pitch. Let me invest 30 minutes out of my life to listen to his interview." Okay, Mark won't care. Not to put words in his mouth, but just podcast hosts in general won't care. I'm just using him as a placeholder here. So what do I do instead? And this is actually the most important thing, is I don't send him now I do, because I've been on bigger shows, so I do that as a flex, as an indirect flex in the PS. But at the end, what I used to do, and I still do, is I have a link to my YouTube video. But I want to be clear with what I mean here. You don't need a dedicated YouTube channel for this strategy to work. So what I get my clients to do that you can literally copy paste is I have them create the best one YouTube video, not like 10, one, about if they were on the show, this is the value that I would share. So like the 5 public speaking tips, my 3 daily exercises. And I record that one video. You don't need to have 200 videos like me, just one. So let's say we take Brian. Brian would say like 3 communication tips to master, and he just shares the value. And that's the video. You could start with the Zoom call that you're recording. Later, I'd recommend you invest $200, okay? Like spend $200 and just get a professional to do that. And that video you send to everybody in your pitch. But what happens, and the psychology behind this, is a host might say, I don't want to listen to the interview, but oh, there's a YouTube video. Let me just click this really quick. So they'll open it, and then your face pops up. You're communicating really well. It's a 3 to 5 minute video. It's not about saying, hey, have me on the show. No, no, no. It's just straight value. This is the tips. They'll listen to that 3-minute video. It's quick. They'll say, wow, I want my audience to hear these tips, and they'll book you on the show. That's the secret behind my success.
I'll say the other advantage of sending a video link to a YouTube, which by the way, it's free to post a video on YouTube, is then the host gets an idea of what your equipment and your setup looks like. You know, there's a value in having even a $50, $100 microphone and a decent camera that, you know, that stands out to me. When I have a guest that applies and they're on a potato, it's not as appealing as someone who's put the time and effort into being a great guest. I love the idea, by the way, of adding the podcast, a part of the podcast description into the pitch. You know, because when I look at being, you know, pitching podcast, Brenden, it's always same thing with prospecting. Because I think of being a podcast guest kind of as prospecting. It's a balance between scalability and being replicable, while also being custom and unique at the same time. Because I'm always looking for, how can I hire someone to do this so I can spend my time doing something that's bigger picture, you know? And having a template that includes brief podcast description to me is very scalable, replicable, while also being custom. I like that tip a lot. So are you sending this all in one pitch, or are you sending it like day 1, this is the copy, day 5, I'll send a follow-up? Are you doing it with a follow-up, or is it all in one request?
You got it. So Mark is proving to all of us that he's much better at business than I am. I don't even send follow-ups, brother. Even if I should totally have a follow-up sequence and do all that stuff. I don't even bother with it. I think the key is, and I should, by the way, if I'm being honest, and if I had like a team around this is another lesson I need to learn from Mark. So I'm not perfect. I think that's the key, right? Imperfect action. Like I would say the next level of the strategy, which we're working on in 2023. This is more advanced though. So if you're not tapped out of Podmatch and Guestio and Matchmaker, you don't go into the next level. The next level for us now is we're looking to build a real team. So now I'm going to be hiring assistants this year, and now we're going to go after all the podcasts. We're going to try and pitch everybody. And then blow my media brand up. That's the next piece. Now that we're starting to make more money, but
Let's go.
But the first part is really just saying like, okay, like just send the pitch. Don't worry about the follow-up sequence, because most of them are just going to say no. But if 10% of them say yes, because a lot of you won't want to go on 300 shows. Let me be perfectly honest. My energy level is just, I love it so much. Most of us don't like guesting on too many shows because it sounds sexy at the front end. But what you realize, I remember once I did like 12 interviews straight. You're saying the same thing 12 different times, like the same thing. So eventually you get exhausted. So most of you, your goals are probably to guest on 2 shows a week. It's probably to be like on 100. Yeah. It seems like a lot. So that's why for you guys, I don't recommend follow-up sequences unless you really want to get out of there. I think it's really increasing your top of funnel. Like just basically what I'm saying to you is if you pitch everyone on Podmatch with this type of sequence, I just posted my pitch in the chat. You can just copy paste that, apply that for your own thing. You'll hit your target. There's no doubt.
I mean, when I think about follow-ups, because I agree with you, following up is the bane of my existence. Although as salespeople, we know we need to do it. But you know, last week we went into a lot of detail on LinkedIn and some LinkedIn automation and some ways to scale that up. And so when I'm thinking about, I want to be a podcast guest, I already have this automation I'm paying for. Maybe I can just add an automation to reach out to small business owners. If I go to LinkedIn and I do a search for small business owners and podcast hosts, I could probably just set up an automation that starts reaching out to thousands of podcast hosts that are also small business owners, which are the people that I want to connect with. So just kind of take it to the next level here with some LinkedIn automation. So, you know.
Like I said, Mark, I learned something new from every podcast host. That's brilliant. I think I'm going to copy that strategy. That's really smart, actually. I already do LinkedIn automation for my business, and we have a lot of follow-up sequences for that for clients. But I never thought to do that with podcast hosts. You're giving me ideas, man. That's smart. I like that.
I never had the idea either until just now, which is why I think these kind of groups, sharing of ideas, fleshing out ideas is so valuable. Brenden, where can we find more of you in the future? For all the listeners out there, where can we find Brenden in the future?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Mark, and the rest of the team. This is super fun, and I hope it didn't scare anyone. Just copy my pitch, and you'll get the results you're looking for. That's all you need. So there's two ways to keep in touch. The first one is the YouTube channel. Just go to Mastertalk in one word. You'll have access to hundreds of free videos, how to speak. The second way to keep in touch, for those of you who are interested, come to one of our free trainings. We do a free training on effective communication that Brian has been to, that a bunch of other people have been to, that we do every 2 weeks. And if you want to jump on that call, just go to rockstarcommunicator.com. It's a live session with me, and I facilitate it for 90 minutes.
Boom. And I'll have links below. Any other final questions or thoughts here from the group? Any final questions? I'll make sure everyone gets a chance. Phil, I can see you've been engaged here. Any big pickups here for you, brother?
Yeah, I'm good to stay for another 5 minutes, so no worries.
No, I'm good, Mark. I appreciate it. I got some notes, so yeah, I appreciate your time, Brenden.
I'll
Likewise,
definitely
Phil.
we'll definitely be sharing the template, the exact template that Brenden used. I'll share my exact template that I use for guest outreach as well. So we can get on some shows and we can provide some value. We can get some freaking clients, baby. Let's make some money. Let's go to our wife or our husband and say, hey, look, I made some money. Pretty cool, huh? That's what we want. I want that for you. Brian, you got a closing thought here, brother?
Yeah, just a final question. Sorry, Brenden. I love asking questions, so I hope you don't mind. I'm just throwing
I love
a
them, man.
bunch at you. So as far as for us who are guesting on these podcasts and we have a call to action, whether it's to point somebody to our business or point somebody to our own podcast, do you have any just like quick advice for how you go about just giving that call to action as soon as you're done being a guest, something that's just really worked well for you?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian. I'll be honest, I'm not the best at CTA in the business, or else I probably would have gotten more clients. So take my advice with a grain of salt. But the one that I prefer, that I like a lot, is really the rockstarcommunicator.com. It has gotten me a lot of clients because people like that offer. It's not like a free book or a PDF. It's like, oh, I can see Brenden live in a workshop. Like, why wouldn't I say yes to that? It's free. So the people who really want to be clients, they tend to want to book that. But I don't think it's necessarily the best CT in the business either. I just think the general rule of thumb is just make sure they get on your list in some way, shape, or form. For us getting on the free training, people are really happy to trade their email for that because they're like, well, he probably charges like $1,000 an hour to come see him somewhere. So like, I'd rather watch him for free and just trade an email for it. Like you were happy to trade yours, right? So I think that's the thing. Just find something to get them on your list.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Of course.
Boom. Great thoughts. Brenden, thanks for being here. I will see everybody next Monday when we're doing Q&A with you, with me. Come in with your problems, walk away with real actionable solutions. That's the goal of next week's session. And Brenden, just thanks for being here and sharing your Master Talk points with us today, brother.
Thanks, team. Great to be here.